Hello, my friend. On today's episode, Mark Fisher and I are talking about the only 5 numbers you need to know to track your gym's growth. We talk about 5 key metrics that everyone should have on their dashboard that are the main numbers you should be tracking and looking at to track your gym's progress over time. And also make a quick note in this episode, our microphones, we had some technical issues, go in and out a little bit. I think you can still hear us fine, but apologies in advance for any ear aches. But enjoy this episode and get out your pen and paper because we threw out a lot of numbers pretty quickly. So take some notes. Let's dive in. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to give you a quick reminder that we are going to Toronto for one of our twice a year Unicorn Society retreats. The theme is marketing and sales, and you're invited. It's March 21st and 22nd. We have a limited number of spots for people who are not in Unicorn Society, and they're going fast. I think when I last looked, I think we sold maybe half of them already, maybe more. And so go over to Instagram, DM us the word Toronto. We'll send you all the information you need. A link to our Instagram is down below in the show notes. But come and join us. It's going to be a fantastic 2 days of working with me and Mark and Ben and Pete, the rest of our team, meeting other Unicorn Society members. And we'd love to have you there. It's going to be 2 fantastic days of learning. Anything you want to share about the retreats, Fisher? I know they're a highlight of our year.
No, I'm just sort of thinking through in my head how to fit in 2 cocktail bars that are in the top World 100 in Toronto that I haven't been to. So I'm just going to make a note to find out when their RSVPs open and kind of think how I make that work within our existing schedule. Important context. Priorities.
Yes. Sales, marketing, top cocktails in the world. That's really the agenda for the 2 days.
It's not a bad thing to have. Yeah.
Honestly.
I'll be still lightweight by then as I'm taking my yearly 3. So for listeners that don't know, every year I take off January, February, and August. So instead of doing a dry January, I do like a dry quarter spread over the year. And I think I'm just going to keep adding months here. I think I'm just going to slowly whittle down. So by the time I'm in my 60s, I'll have 2 months of the year where I'm just getting fucking hammered all the time. But
listen, it's a solid plan. It's a solid plan.
Listen, it does reduce your it's the law of constraints. It does reduce your drinking if you just like keep cutting off months.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I've been boring for many years though. I think I just went cold turkey at one point. And so I've been boring for years, but I do once in a while have a sip of something if it's really interesting, but that's about it. That's about it.
Yes.
Well, we're recording this at the kind of end of January. So before we dive in, how's your 2025 been so far, Fisher?
It's been good. Yeah. I mean, I'm sleeping a lot. I seem to have cracked some sleep code. And I've gotten over 8 hours tracked on my Oura Ring, which is not easy to do because you have to be in your bed a long time to get 8 hours.
Yeah.
And I've had 8 hours, I think something like 7 of the last 9 nights, which is just unheard of for me to have that much sleep.
Yeah.
So feeling pretty immortal over here. But it did come at the cost of stopping my coffee by 10 and no later than noon, which I wouldn't have thought would have made that big of a difference because I would usually cut it off by 2 anyway. But those extra couple hours have maybe had a really big impact. So
yeah, that's amazing. When you can find access to like really great quality sleep, there's nothing like it.
Yes.
There's nothing like
it's
it.
The game.
Yeah.
It's the game.
Yeah. Good for you. Well, yeah, my year's been good so far. I was mentioning before we got this started that I decided that 2025 was going to be kind of my year of health. I think with, all the things happening in the last few years, including, being in school, I really have let my health get on the back burner. And so I think this is the year I'm kind of doubling down and getting more serious. Plus, I turned 46, right? And, going to the doctors once you're past 45 means, you're doing you're talking about all the nasty things.
Yeah.
You're doing all the things. And so that was, I don't call it a wake up call because it's not that extreme, but it was a little bit like, oh yeah, everything really counts now in a way that it maybe didn't 10 years ago. Yeah. And so I need to, change some shit.
Yes.
And so, so I'm excited. I was redoing our basement to make it more effective for working out. And I bought a meal prep book because, I like cooking, but I've never been good at meal prepping. So, that kind of shit. Stuff that, we talk about a lot, at MFF and we help our clients with, but some things that I haven't really built habits for, I'm kind of diving into in 2025, which I feel good about. And maybe it's another podcast for another day, but I feel good about the start. Yeah, I feel good about the start.
Yes. Good.
Which brings us to today's topic, which is actually all about numbers. So I love that we're talking about this because it's been a while since we dove into kind of the nitty gritty of like key metrics, KPIs, dashboards, whatever y'all want to call them, whatever you refer them to. But we call them usually kind of key metrics or KPIs. And we want to talk about this today because I think all too often, I'll speak for myself, and I think you'll agree with this, Fisher, that we talk to a lot of gym owners who just get bogged down by thinking they need to track 1,000,001 numbers of their gym. And certainly over the years, we've certainly done our fair share of getting bogged down by tracking 1,000,001 numbers. And we all know that we only really want to track numbers that are useful to look at on a regular basis that help us make decisions. And I think, one of the things you've thought a lot about recently is what we're going to talk about now, which is we think there's only like 5 of them that really matter the most. And not that you don't need any others, but I think you can do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to analyzing and keeping your finger on the pulse of your gym with really just kind of 5 key metrics. And I think when you can narrow down the number of things you're tracking, it just gets rid of all that complexity of having to do all that reporting and tracking and putting numbers in spreadsheets and then looking at them and not knowing to do when you're looking at them. And so I think there's a lot that can come from streamlining and simplifying your kind of key metrics. But that's kind of my way into today's conversation. What would you add?
I don't think I have anything to add. Yeah, I think you should track it. And if you're not, there's some issues, and hopefully this conversation will make it feel a little bit more accessible, because part of the issue is some people will just get overwhelmed and they feel like there's a lot that they need to track. And that's actually in most situations a bad idea. All information is a stressor. It all takes time to pull that data. And gyms are simple businesses. There's actually not a ton you need to know.
Yeah. So let's dive in. You want to just kind of walk through, the first one or two. So the first one obviously is at top of the funnel lead flow. So what matters there, Fisher?
Well, it's interesting. I might, and this is a framework I've just been playing on in my head recently. And now that we're in the conversation, I might actually suggest the first one we start with, which is going to sound obvious, and maybe it's good to start with a small win, because I hope that at least this number is
great.
I think we probably want to start with active members.
Sure.
And you can do this a number of ways. The thing to understand that's interesting is active members is a snapshot as opposed to a measurement of what happens over time, right? Which is to say that classically the way you would pull this number is and I think let's keep it monthly is best for all of us for today. I think there's a time and a place for weekly and maybe even month to date. But again, we're keeping it simple today. So monthly. So on the first of the month, how many active members do you have? Because once you know that, once you can figure out termination, sales, revenue, a lot of the other numbers you find out are just math based on how many active members you currently have. So that's where I'd start.
Yeah, let's do it. As we go through these, let's maybe just use an example so that people can make sense of the math. So the first thing you want to track, let's just call it 100 members. Let's just say that for the sake of argument, you have 100 members. What's the next number you want to figure out from there?
Yep. I think the next number you'd want to figure out there I think first, we want to know what is your monthly revenue. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because this number, certainly you can track monthly. And obviously your revenue is, of course, a very important number, but specifically we want to use is the revenue to understand your actual average revenue per month. Because I'll let you know in a funny joke, if you're a gym business coach, a funny joke is going to happen a lot. You're going to talk to a gym owner, you're like, gym owner, what's your average revenue per month? And they'll be like, $400 per month. Our members pay $400 per month. They're like, oh, wow, okay, that's pretty legit. Okay, cool. So how many members do you have? 100. And okay, cool. What is your monthly revenue? How much did you do in monthly revenue last month? And they'll be like, $4,000. And you're like, wait, you have 100? Wait. Because you do the math, that's actually only $40 per month. Now, of course, I'm joking. It's usually not that extreme, but I kid you not, this happens almost without exception, because the gym owner in their head is thinking about their current top rate card, and they are conveniently forgetting about people that are on promotional rates. They're forgetting about long-term members that pay severely under what everybody else does. So I think an honest accounting of your actual average revenue per member is where we start. And this is something we have to check off in the very beginning. It's one of the reasons why this is one of the first things we look at, because your whole model's not going to make sense unless you are pulling in an adequate amount of average revenue per member per month. Now, the exact amount is maybe beyond the scope of today's conversation. But to state the very obvious, the less people you train per session, the higher that needs to be. The more people you can train per session, the more total clients you're going to need. But because you're getting more volume, the lower you can get away in the average revenue per month because you're servicing more people per session.
Yeah. I'll throw out some quick numbers for those of you who have a pen and paper ready. This comes from one of the tools we have for our Unicorn Society members called our Big Five Foundations of Financially Fit Gyms. But just generally speaking, when you're looking for benchmarks for average revenue per member, we say that if on average one-on-one personal training costs $85 a session, then you should on average make between $600 and $800 per month for one-on-one training members. If you're doing small group, and on average, those small group sessions cost $45 a session, then you should be getting somewhere between $300 and $500 per month per small group training member. And when it comes to large group, if on average you're charging $25 per session for large group training, you should be getting somewhere between $175, $225 for per month for the average kind of large group training member. And again, we say average because of all the things Fisher just mentioned. Some people are going to be on promotions. Some people are going to be on older rate cards. But generally speaking, those are like the windows. You can go back and rewind this because I know I said it fast and write them down. But those are the kind of benchmarks that we see both in our members and other, training facilities, which are just benchmarks, right? You might be in a market where things are a little bit cheaper or a little more expensive than that. You might be at the higher or lower ends of those ranges. That's okay. But you do need to know this number for all the reasons we're about to talk about and more.
Yeah. And
so we got
to state the obvious.
Go ahead.
I was going to say briefly, if you're in between those numbers, you can sort of play with the math. Yeah, it's interesting. Is we say that aloud too. I probably can make the case for us that we can probably remove the range and just be like, this is kind of the bare minimum. Because at the end of the day, in theory, as long as you're making enough actual income and what we call total owner compensation for the amount of stress you're taking on for running the business, if that amount feels good to you, both as a percentage of the revenue as well as an absolute dollar amount for your market, we're okay. And essentially what we're doing with these numbers, these benchmarks for how much average revenue per month per person per session is, we know from having worked with hundreds of gyms at this point that if you are below these numbers, there's just almost no way for the math to work. It just doesn't matter. You can't service enough clients for the gym to actually be profitable and to really pay you what you should be making as the owner.
Yeah, 100%. All right, great. So in terms of key metrics here, we got total active members. We're going to look at monthly, first of each month. Then we also want to look at total revenue or average revenue per member as a way of taking a look at how much we're bringing in per member per month on average. Then what?
Yep. So once we know that, and that's sort of like past the test, we know like, okay, we're in the right ballpark. Well, then it's kind of simpler because it's probably a good idea to look at that every month. But once you know you're in the right ballpark and your pricing makes sense, that's largely going to be taken care of, right? Unless you're doing silly things like constant massive forever discounts. So the next thing I think we want to look at now that we know our active members, we know that it passed, okay, this business model could make sense test. Now we want to look at the terminations per month because of course the number of terminations per month allow us to get a very important number, which is the churn percentage. And your churn percentage is simply your terminations in a given month divided by the active members at the beginning of the month. There's more complex ways to do it, but today's about being simple, so we're just going to do the simple way. So as an example, if you had 100 members at the beginning of the month and you have 10 terminations in a given month, that's a 10% termination, which is bad. If you lose 3 members that month, that's good. 3% for 1 month is very good. And to give you some sense of the standards we tend to look at, very crudely, for most of the gyms we work with, we're shooting for 5%. Now, that number can sometimes get a little bit lower if people are paying more money. If you have less of them, it's a higher touch customer service. Certainly, if somebody's on a year-long agreement, that can help get those numbers lower. On the other end, if people are ready to cancel at any time, if it's a lower price point, if it's higher volume, if it's less higher touch, maybe it could go up to 6%. Sometimes you see up to 8% is an acceptable standard if you have a very large group boutique concept. A lot of the fitness franchises I know, it's pretty standard to have 8%. But the types of gyms we work with, an independent gym owner, the par generally is going to be 5% or less. Again, if you can do 3%, that's great. Just keep in mind, you're going to lose about 1% of people, no matter what you do, just from people moving or, not to be morbid, but dying or any of the number of reasons of things that you can literally do nothing about.
Yeah, 100%. I think, yeah, like we said, all of these are benchmarks for you to kind of be aware of. But like most of our gyms do a pretty good job of staying under 5%, and under 3% seems like really pretty world class, seems pretty revolutionary.
Yep.
You have some
That's
real
great to hear, John.
stickiness factor with your
Yep.
clients, so they're staying for a really long time. I think the one exception I'll cover on this, and I've recorded a podcast with Pete about this, is for those of you who are sports performance gyms or do a lot of seasonal
Right.
training, you also might want to take that into account. You might want to consider your churn or your attrition for each season and track the number of people who stay for the complete season, 3 months, 4 months, however long the season is. You might also want to just track, this is maybe a separate metric, but you wouldn't track this monthly, but seasonally, your return rate. How many people from the last season come back to the next season? And for those, I don't know, we can give you exact benchmarks. It'll depend a little bit about your sport and how old the kids are or the teens are. But generally, you want to track those things like your churn for those programs that aren't year round, and just try to beat yourself, do better than yourself from the last season.
Yep.
It's a good way to start figuring out what your benchmarks are. But I want to just
Yep.
give that little shout out to our seasonal sports
Yeah.
performance folks, because it's a slightly different. But for most of you who have, annual, monthly memberships or even just monthly memberships, I think, tracking this once a month and losing no more than 5% is a great place to start. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we got total active members. We have total average revenue per member. We have the churn percentage. Now what?
Two left to go. All right. Well, the next thing, assuming we want our gym to grow, we need more new members than terminations. Otherwise, obviously, we're going to be standing still or worse, going backwards. So this number is usually thought of as an absolute number. That probably does make sense. Though the other way you could figure it out is say, like, okay, well, if churn is 5%, then new members needs to be 6% or more, right? And most people are going to be a little bit more ambitious. And again, more commonly, this is done as an absolute number. So you might say hypothetically, okay, we have 100 members. Our target for churn is 5 members, and we want to grow by 5 members per month. So that means that in order to grow at that pace, at least for this month, we want 10 new members. Now, to state the very obvious, you start to see how this is why you can't sell out attrition for forever. Just as you can't go into the gym every week and add 10 more pounds to your deadlift for years and years on end, at a certain point, the gym will reach a certain level you can't outsell attrition anymore, because at 100 members, if you're losing 5 members per month, that's good. That's 5% churn. That's pretty good, right? If you have 1,000 members, which some larger boutique class concept doesn't happen often, but it can happen. Well, at that point, first of all, it's going to be very unlikely you're doing only 5%, because it's real hard to keep the numbers down when you're doing that volume. But let's be very generous and say that's the case. Okay, well, now you have 50 members you're losing per month. So you need to sell like 12 to 13 memberships every week just to stand still. And if you want to grow, you want to sell even more. So I share that just as an example. Again, that's not a scenario that most people listening to this are going to be dealing with. So if I can go back to a more realistic scenario, you have 100 members, you're going to lose 5. You want to grow by 5. So your target is going to be 10 new members per month. And of course, month over month, you'll need to slowly increase that if you wish to continue to grow at that pace.
Yeah. So to recap, Fisher, I think, the whole point of this one is really that if your churn is going to be under 5%, then your sales need to be at least 6% or more, right? And I think, like you said, you really want to have like an actual number in mind every week for the number of, new folks you want to get in the door, and be really, laser focused on that. And so I think that's a really important one, which really brings us to our last and final metric. So take us away with number 5.
So now we're finally at the place where a lot of people begin, which is more leads, right? And yes, you probably need more leads. Many people do. But now we can do just a little more simple math to understand how many leads you might need. So if you need 10 new members this month to grow, and keep in mind, that's a lot more than some of you need, you're going to need 4 to 10 times as many total prospects. These are leads, people that have either opted in for a Facebook ad or opted in on your website or emailed you or called or walked in to ask more about your services. You're going to need 4 to 10 times as many leads as you need new members. Now, that's kind of a grotesquely general number, because if we're getting more specific, if these were, let's say, hypothetically all referrals, and it's going to be unlikely, but if they're all referrals, you might need even a little bit less, right? Because hopefully a higher percentage of people coming in ready to sign up are going to turn into members. On the other hand, when you're dealing with Facebook ads, it's not uncommon sometimes to only convert 1 out of 10 leads into an actual new membership. So that's how I got to that 4 to 10 times, because you're going to convert of all leads from all sources anywhere from hopefully at least 10%, if not something is wrong, to as high as 25%. It's going to be very rare you do more. If you're doing a higher percentage than 25%, usually it means you're a very small gym, you're not getting very many leads, and you're only getting laydowns, and your conversion is going to go down if you start putting some gas on that particular fire. So again, this hypothetically means if you think about a month, now you need 25 to 100 leads, which I know probably sounds crazy talk to a lot of you. So on a weekly basis, now we're thinking we're going to need 6 to 25 leads per week based on how well you're converting from the top of funnel leads.
Yeah, I think it's crude math, but I think it really gets people most to where they need to be to understanding the funnel.
Yeah.
Right. So I think just doing that math of 4 to 10 times, the amount, I think it makes a lot of sense, because, for most of them, they're going to be getting some mixture of people who are easier to convert and some people who are less easy to convert. And as we've said a lot on this podcast, the more you do, digital ads, the more you do paid advertising, the more you're going to get colder and colder people who are less likely to convert, or I'll say harder to convert. Yep. And so just know that the more paid ads you do, the more likely that number changes. You'll need more of them to get to the same place. And that's normal and to be expected, because those folks who are clicking on ads often just don't know anything about you. So it's going to take them longer to convert. Yeah. So let's recap. Do you want to kind of go through all 5, Fisher? Just kind of list them out one last time.
Yeah. So you're going to track your active members, how many active members you have on the first of the month. And as a reminder, that one is weird because it's not a measurement over how much happened over a period of time. It's a snapshot. So active members on the first of the month, then you figure out what is your total revenue for the previous month, and that will get your average revenue per month. And again, we want to double check this to make sure we're in the realm of reasonable, not only from your rate card, but your actual active average revenue member per month, because sometimes it's very different than what you might think. From there, we want to figure out, okay, well, how many people terminated over that given month, which lets us know our churn. We want to be 5% or better. If we can get to 3%, amazing, but at least 5%. And certainly once you're up to 6, 7, 8%, you just want to be looking, is the fulfillment as good as it could be? From there, we figure out, how do we want to grow? So this can either be a percentage. More commonly, this is done as in absolute numbers. In our hypothetical example, if you're losing 5 members, you want to grow by 5 per month, you need 10 members. And then finally, whatever your total new member goal is, you can multiply it by 4 to 10, and that will tell you how many leads you need in a given month.
Bravo.
That's
Great
simple.
Summary.
That's
Great
the
summary.
simplest way to break down your gym, people.
It's almost like you've thought about this and talked about this before.
It's almost like it's the only thing I think about all day long, every day. It's almost like that.
Well, let's wrap it up there, because I think with those 5 numbers, people have a lot to chew on. If you're not tracking any of those numbers, I think those 5 are a great place to start. Yep. And as Mark said, tracking them at least just monthly for now is a great place to start. Over time, you might want to track some things weekly, like leads, for example. Yep. And some things might always be monthly, which is totally fine. Yep. Things like churn probably doesn't make a lot of sense to look every week for most of you. But I think, start by tracking these. And if over time you feel like you're really missing information in your business, you need to add more KPIs to your dashboard, I think just add them thoughtfully, right? And I think more data is not always it's not always helpful. Like Fisher said earlier at the beginning of this conversation, all information is a stressor, and more numbers just give you more to think about when sometimes you need less to think about. Yeah. We'll leave it there. Thanks for a great conversation, my friend. And for those of you who want to join us in Toronto, March 21st and 22nd, go over to Instagram, DM us the word Toronto. We'll send you all the information you need, but do it quickly because we only have a few spots left. Thanks, Fisher. See you on the next one.
Bye.